Leaders of West African countries discuss the military coup in Mali as an army colonel declares himself the new military leader. Nigeria's COVID-19 cases passed the 50,000 mark. Plus, Kenya to explore treatment of moderately ill COVID-19 patients with blood plasma from recovered patients. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Layo Adegoke. Mali's opposition coalition has dismissed efforts by regional powers to block a coup-driven change of government, saying it would work with the junta that ousted the president to restore stability to the country. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, which is convening over the crisis, suspended Mali, shut the borders and halted financial flows in response to Tuesday's overthrow of President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. The M5 RFP coalition of anti-Keïta opposition groups said it was working alongside the mutineers and labeled the ECOWAS sanctions an overreaction stemming from some regional leaders' fears that the coup could set off political unrest in the country.
Tuesday's military coup have met with opposition leader Mahmoud Dicko, a Salafist preacher who electrified protesters during anti-Keïta demonstrations in recent weeks that drew tens of thousands of people. There is also a new military leader, Colonel Assimi Goïta, who declares himself the head of the junta that ousted President Keïta.
Following the events which led to the change of power, we believed that it was our duty to state our position to the General Secretaries so they may be able to work immediately. As you know, Mali finds itself in a socio-political and security crisis, and we are not allowed to make any more mistakes. By intervening as we did yesterday, we have raised the country above.
Other coup leaders have also urged people to go back to work at their daily businesses. As the streets in Bamako are calm and things are getting back to normal, celebrations at the military coup continued around Independence Square in the capital. Anti-government protesters poured into the square, cheering the mutineers who drove past in military vehicles. In the meantime, the African Union has condemned the unconstitutional change of government. The United Nations also condemned the military mutiny, calling for the immediate restoration of constitutional order and rule of law in Mali.
Secretary General strongly condemned the military mutiny, which culminated in the arrest of President Keïta and members of his government. The Secretary General calls for an immediate restoration of constitutional order and rule of law in Mali. He reiterates his call for a negotiated solution, peaceful resolution of their differences, and expresses his full support for the African Union, ECOWAS, in their efforts to find a peaceful solution to the current crisis.
With this political crisis, there are concerns it could disrupt a military campaign against jihadists linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State operating in northern and central region. However, France says it will continue with its military operations against militant Islamists.
Well, African Affairs analyst Yinka Oyeniji joins us now for more analysis on the situation in Mali. Thank you, Mr. Oyeniji, for speaking to us.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Now, ECOWAS had tried to mediate in this political crisis, but that didn't pan out so well. Now they are meeting to discuss further sanctions. What do you make of the body's response to all that is happening?
Well, quite frankly, I think that ECOWAS is just grandstanding. Before and again, we've had several crises brewing in several parts of Africa, including Cameroon, Sudan, Guinea, and all of that. But you ask yourself how efficient the intervention of ECOWAS has been. ECOWAS by itself, if you look at the structure and look at the leadership it provides, ECOWAS somehow fosters sit-tight leaders in Africa, if I may say. What is the leadership of ECOWAS like? It's not dynamic in any form. Now, if you keep threatening sanctions and all of that, who suffers from it? The citizens or the junta? So I don't think that ECOWAS is approaching this issue in the way it should. I think that what we should be looking at is a wholesome structure for good governance in Africa, in different countries. That is what will sustain democracy. Other than that, sanctions will not bring about the desired change if it is actually what we want.
Just mentioned the citizens of the countries. What has happened in Mali also played out in Sudan, also in Algeria, where the people protested and finally got their wishes. What does this say about the influence of the people of a nation?
All right, so what it is every citizen of every country, wherever we are in the world, we're looking for a better life. That's what it is. I'll tell you that sometimes citizens determine that they fare better under military rule than democratic governance. Democratic governance by itself, you also want to check whether it's been truly democratic. What we have had are military rulers putting off one uniform and wearing another garb altogether. Now, under military rule, there seems to be some direction because it is interventionist. But for democratic rule, it's marks of corruption all of the time. It's marks of nepotism and all. So the people are not interested in what kind of government it is, whether it's military or civilian. What they want is merely good governance. Now, the government that has just been ousted went to the polls earlier this year, and it seemingly hijacked a lot of positions, the same way we have in other parts of Africa when we are talking about electioneering and militarization of democratic process. It comes down to the same thing. That government lost its credibility or goodwill with its people, and the citizens will queue behind anybody that can seem to give them a glimmer of hope.
Now, Mr. Oyiniji, you talked about democratic governance and just in your response now, how can Africa, permanently curb the recourse to military intervention in democratic governance?
All right, so we've studied this even in educational institutions forever. Students of politics keep talking about military intervention in politics and all of that. What we do lack is a true democracy. Now, I'm not going to go into definition of democracy. I'm just going to say what difference is another government going to make? That's what the people are talking about. It is unfortunate that this has happened in Mali, but it portends danger for other African nations. Now, we've had insurgency, we have insecurity all over. We have militarization of rebels from Libya to even Chad, and then Nigeria is also facing its own. Until we begin to show people that they can hold their governments accountable, the military would always intervene in democratic governance. They've never stayed away. The reason why so many citizens are not even taking up arms is out of fear of the military. In Nigeria, we have sometimes law enforcement agencies oppressing citizens. If that continues to be the case, then it portends danger for what we call democracy or self-rule anywhere. As long as anybody has any military might, then they are potential leaders. But the only thing that can put a stop to this is to begin to give quality participation to the people. It's not having the same leaders over and over again without any sense of direction eventually. They just saved the face of the prime minister of Mali. They just saved face because that government came in, promised a lot, and delivered nothing. So every government that does not deliver good governance is sitting on a keg of explosive in Africa.
Mr. Oyinka Oyiniji, thank you so much for your analysis. African Affairs Analyst, thank you for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
A 100-member closed electoral list, dominated by supporters of Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, has won a third of the seats in a newly created Senate. The head of the National Election Authority says only about 8 million of the more than 62 million registered voters turned up on August 11th to 12th to cast their ballots in the election for the second chamber of parliament, given a voter turnout of just 14.23%. The Council of Senators, an advisory body without legislative powers, established through a constitutional amendment approved last year, will include 200 elected members and 100 presidential appointees. As in Egypt's main parliamentary chamber, the House of Representatives, supporters of the president are expected to dominate the Senate. 100 Senate members will be elected as individual candidates and 100 more from a closed list system where people vote for parties rather than individuals. Nigeria, Africa's most populous country, has now passed the 50,000 mark in coronavirus cases. According to the country's Center for Disease Control, over a third of the cases are in the commercial capital, Lagos State. After South Africa and Egypt, Nigeria is the worst affected by coronavirus on the continent. It currently has more than 12,000 active cases and nearly 1,000 deaths. However, 37,304 people have recovered. Well, Zambia's President Edgar Lungu has announced that his Vice President Inonge Wina has tested positive for coronavirus. Her daughter, who she lives with, has also contracted the virus. President Lungu wished the 79-year-old leader a quick recovery in a tweet. The country has now recorded 10,218 cases of coronavirus. The country's football association had to cancel its domestic league last month following a spike in COVID-19 cases. Well, an Air Peace flight has landed in South Africa for the evacuation of 200 passengers returning to Nigeria for various reasons. This is the second of such special flights from South Africa, and the passengers are mostly Nigerians. South Africa is yet to open up for international flights. However, the Air Peace flight is expected to fly to Abuja via Lagos.
We have 200 on the list of those who have made commitment and paid, but we don't know how many will go into the aircraft because sometimes some people will decline at the last minute. The flight is going to Lagos because a great number of the people, about 140, 50, is dropping in Lagos. So once they get to Lagos, they will make the arrangement to take the others to Abuja.
Well, South Africa's luxury game lodges are empty and safari vehicles have gathered dust, with borders closed and airlines struggling due to the coronavirus crisis. For Somkanda, a community-owned Big Five game reserve, selling game meat has thrown it a lifeline to survive the pandemic.
From the savannah to the plate. For Somkanda, a community-owned Big Five game reserve in South Africa, selling game meat has thrown it a lifeline as the continent's multi-billion-dollar safari industry unravels. The reserve normally gives away or sells at low cost the meat from Impala and Inyala, which it calls each year to manage stocks. But facing a loss of up to 90% of its revenue, it's now actively marketing the meat, often seen as a delicacy both by restaurants and foreign tourists, to bring in between 50,000 and 100,000 rand per month. That's between about $2,875 and $5,730. Roeli Kloppers is chief executive at the Wildlines, which co-manages the reserve.
The tourism and all of that income we've lost, we had to look for something else. There's always culling on the reserve, and basically all we've done is we said, instead of culling and then just giving that meat away or selling it at a very poor and low price locally, what we've done is to try and market it and put it into the commercial market.
Before the pandemic, local and international tourists would watch the Big Five on guided bushwalks and game drives. Fana Gumbi is the leader of Mvukweni Community Trust, which owns the reserve. He says the extra funds are vital for the park's upkeep.
We had to look for other ways of boosting the income in the reserve so it can generate money to pay the bills. We have electricity bills, water pumping, general maintenance, and paying of salaries. That's why we've decided to use the culled animals that are breeding in numbers so that meat can be sold in the market and we can generate extra income to cover the expenses of running the reserve.
The African Union estimates that countries on the continent have lost almost $55 billion in travel and tourism revenues in just 3 months due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Still ahead on Network Africa. Women's rights activists in Somalia are strongly opposing lawmakers who want to legalize child marriage in the country. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the program. Kenya is developing a protocol that will allow experts to explore the treatment of moderately ill COVID-19 patients with blood plasma from recovered patients. COVID-19 survivors are left with blood plasma, the liquid portion of the blood that contains antibodies used to help fight infection. Globally, there are more than 80 trials recruiting COVID-19 patients to study the effect of convalescent plasma, blood from recovered patients. South Africa is also testing this therapy. Now, since the pandemic began, many citizens are skeptical of going to the hospital for fear of contracting COVID-19 virus. That's why in Ghana, the World Health Organization is providing support to the health service in their efforts to continue providing other essential medical services to the population. At the Greater Accra Regional Hospital, vaccinations continue to be offered along with other critical services for children, and care is provided to mothers before, during, and after pregnancy. Health worker safety is also a critical component in the COVID-19 response. In the country, more than 10,000 health workers in 40 African countries have contracted the virus since the pandemic began.
People were afraid to go to health services, thinking that it isn't a place where they may actually get into contact with people with COVID. So because of that fear, even people who needed to access health services were fearful to go. And then on the other side, health workers were also worried and have fear of as they interact with different patients. So all of these were issues that we have to look into that would affect the continuity of services. And we don't want to save people from COVID and then get an upsurge of other deaths like maternal and child deaths.
We developed guidelines in collaboration with UNICEF and WHO, especially in the area of maternal and child health services, different approaches to services that prevented grouping and also created a safety for people, both patients and staff, to render services as much as possible, including visiting homes to render services, because some of them were not coming.
Let's move on to other stories now. Zimbabwe's government has reached out to Vatican representative Archbishop Marek Zalewski to seek clarification on criticism by Catholic bishops. The bishops recently released a pastoral letter highlighting corruption, poverty and human rights abuses in the country. They also called for an urgent resolution to the country's economic and political challenges. Justice Minister Ziyambi says the government wants to know if the bishops spoke on behalf of Vatican. Now, at least 27 people, among them 12 prison warders, have been arrested for allegedly smuggling weapons into a Somali prison. The weapons were used in last week's shootout between jailed militant Islamists and security officers during an attempt to escape a heavily guarded prison in the capital, Mogadishu. Somali Justice Minister Hassan Hussein announced the arrest after a special investigation team finished a probe on the attack. Pistols, ammunition and hand grenades were smuggled into the prison. 9 inmates and 6 civilians are among those arrested. Now, the prison warden, Colonel Adan Hussein Kumiye, who was fired after the attack, and his deputy have also been arrested. Somali lawmakers are edging towards legalizing a bill before the legislature that would give the go-ahead for the marriage of girls who have hit puberty, a move that supporters say is in line with Quranic law. But women's rights activists and some ordinary families oppose the bill, saying that too many young girls are already forced into unions that can damage them physically and mentally.
Hafsa Ali Osman was married off at 13 by her father to a man who paid $100. She and her mother say she was beaten and raped for 2 years before they convinced him to divorce her.
My husband would go out in search for some food. Then he would return home empty-handed and beat me, demanding why I haven't prepared lunch for him when I have nothing to cook.
There is no law mandating a minimum age for marriage in Somalia. A bill introduced in Parliament this month by a presidential ally caused some storm of criticism from lawmakers when they realized it would legalize marriage at puberty as early as 10 for some girls. Data from a government survey this year shows that nearly a third of girls are married before their 18th birthday, just under half of those before the age of 15. Many activists like Hodan Ali reject the bill.
This bill, which will be applied in this country, which will affect the most vulnerable and the most poor, right? And the men and women who are passing this bill, rest assured, if anything happens, they will not be subjected to this bill, right? Some of the people who are working on this, their children live in a safe country where the rights of their children are protected.
The lawmaker who presented the bill said it has been reviewed by clerics and is the correct one based on Islam. However, the political turmoil in Somalia means it is unclear when Parliament might vote on the bill.
To a story on wildlife now. Scientists are racing to save the northern white rhino from extinction as they have harvested 10 more eggs from the last 2 females alive. They hope this will help create viable embryos that can be incubated by other rhinos, acting as surrogates, and eventually populate the endangered animal.
It's a race against the clock for the world's most endangered mammal. Scientists working to save the northern white rhino from extinction have now harvested 10 eggs from the last 2 females alive.
How much? What is it? 143.
Neither of the remaining northern white rhinos on Earth, a mother and her daughter, can carry a baby to term. So scientists want to implant the embryos into southern white rhinos instead. Scientists first harvested eggs from the female last year as part of an international team from Kenya, Italy, Germany, and the Czech Republic.
If you want to start a population of a northern white rhino, one baby is not enough. You need as many babies as possible. So this is the reason why we would like to repeat the collection of eggs, let's say every 3, maybe every 4 months. It would depend on the health status of the females in all vegeta.
But there's one potential snag. Humans don't know how to detect the exact time to insert the embryo. So a southern white rhino bull will be sterilized, transported to old Pajeta, and set loose amongst potential surrogate mothers. His response will signal when they are on heat.
We have to admit that we might not succeed fully with having a new northern white rhino population, but these methods that we use and that we have developed, even if they wouldn't help northern white rhino to survive, there are definitely other species that could profit from the knowledge that we gain, during the scientific research.
Even if the method proves unsuccessful, authorities hope that the research can help preserve other endangered species.
And that's where we end the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Adegoke.